The scope of this work, it is managerial economics. So I would like to give an overview of economics altogether. And later on, we will go into connect it to managerial economics, see where it stands in the field of economics altogether. Economics. Since Thomas Carlyle, the famous politician writer of 1795 to 1880, having read Thomas Malthus, called economics a dismal science, that has stuck on the forehead of economics as dismal science. Dismal means ominous, negative, and the science which talks about slacks, limits, poverty. Right. I just want to start from this point, that to me, economics, which has always been the subject of my love, not only a field in which I have worked. I have given a prize for economics, which very few people might have given. So I've given all my career in order to change from medicine and do economics simply because I love it. And I have also given a great deal of prospects of wealth in order to economics. That's a funny story. So I am glad to have become an economist simply because economics has an allure, an attraction to me. And why? I want to share this with you. For me, economics is a science. It's an art. It's in the meantime a science. Not the science of slackness and poverty, but the science of wealth and welfare. So what does economics do? Economics tries to reduce our expenditures, reduce our expenses, reduce our efforts for a given objective, or to maximize the objective for a given amount of effort and input. So the subject of economics is to reduce our way in which we're going to use effort in order to get to the objective. Or, given the effort we're going to make, economics helps us to find the ways of maximizing what we want to get, what we want to attain. In this, economics becomes a noble science which contributes to the welfare of humanity. And it's not strange that the great thinker, Adam Smith, called it the science of the wealth of nations, not the poverty of nations, the wealth of nations. So this is a starting point, that economics is an elegant science which has, like any science, essential parts of art and technique, but it's a science of welfare and human well-being. That's why I call it an elegant science and a noble science. Economic thinking, it starts with, well, I'm just making an overview of it. There's a big discussion about who started economics and where does economic thinking. In this, economics thinking, like any other science, has no beginning in time. If you see the great work of Joseph Schumpeter, The History of Economic Analysis, one of the milestones in the road of economics, he gives us economists from about 4,000 years ago up until now. So, during these 4,000 years, we see that, well, the wisdom and scientific thinking is not limited to our age. So I'm not going to even mention the names. So there are a great many people who have contributed to the development of the science. But the formal science, it starts with, there's a discussion. Some people would say it's William Petty of England, the British economist of 16th, 17th century, who is a founder of economic science. Some people would say it's Adam Smith, who with Wealth of Nations. made economics a science. But, well, we have no row about it. Whoever made it, they all have great contributions. With Adam Smith, we understand how wealth is created. He is the man who has been able to show us the effect of dividing the labor and specializing, which contributes to increase of wealth. I will show in more detail what he meant. But after that, we have great many giants in the road. I will only mention and maybe just mention their contribution to economic science. In his preface to the translation of History of Economic Science, Raymond Barre, the French economist who's a living economist, who was the prime minister in this country, he writes that in certain epochs and periods, some people have created a classical age. What does he mean by classical age? He borrows this concept from Joseph Schumpeter himself. Classical age, according to him, is an age in which somebody is able to sum up the content of a science and say, this is what economics says. He says the first man who created the classical age was Adam Smith. It was 1776. The second man, according to Raymond Barre, the second man who created the classical age was John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, 1850, the British economist philosopher, whose ideas on liberty is very, very famous, the father of liberalism. And later on, again, another British economist, which is Alfred Marshall, 1900 exactly, who wrote The Principle of Economics. He gives another classical age. This means that once you read Alfred Marshall, you know what previous economists have said so far, then he develops on that. So it's a colossal work in which he sums up the content of economic science. And the fourth man, according to Raymond Barre again, who has created a classical age, is Joseph Schumpeter, who in his History of Economic Analysis, not economic thought, economic analysis, he is dealing with the techniques of analysis from Aristotle and before. Say monetary economics, he analyzes what sort of technique did Aristotle use in order to understand what money was and what money does, right? So it's a history of analysis in the course of history. It was in 1951 that he wrote the book. And later on, Raymond Barre adds something else which is interesting. He says, so far we have had these classical ages. It means the giant has come and created a work in which we see the scope of the whole science. But since 1950 onwards, don't expect any more giants to do that. Not because we're not kind of giants, no. Because no giant is able to do that anymore. Because science of economics has expanded so much that it is not the job of one man, it is the job of institutions of academies to sit down and say what economics has said and done since 1950 up until now, or in 10 years or 20 years. So it has become a very vast field. During this period, we come to great monuments in this science. We have the names like Karl Menger, which is an Austrian economist, Fred von Weiser, Bohm-Bawerk, Cornu, Walras. Each of them have put great milestones on the road. For example, Leon Walras has done to economics what Newton did to physics. Newton had the ambition of expressing physics in mathematics. So he mathematized, he invented the language of physics. And since Newton, every physician is partly a mathematician and a physician and a physicist. With Walras, we get the mathematical expression of static equilibria. It means the equilibrium situations in economics all expressed in equations. And he believed that economics could be expressed in mathematics. So, again, I will touch on Walras once I'm going on, because I will explain why today we are Walrasians and we are not Walrasians, to what an extent we accept the work is done and use it, and where we differ from Lowen Walras. Some of the great names, like Bois Gilbert, which is a French economist, Cantillon, Dr. Quenet, who was a medical doctor, was also the founder of a field in economics. He is the one who introduced the concept of input-output in economics, which were later on developed by Leontief, and we get the input-output tables after that. Dr. Quenet, who made it, his book is called Tableau économique, the economic table. He showed that there are balances in economics. Whatever comes in this column has a counterpart in the other column, and there is an equilibrium between. So this is the beginning of production models and so on and so forth. Until the age of 18th century is an epoch which starts in economics, and it's called the scientific classics or classical age. In this classical age, we have great thinkers like David Ricardo. Again, that I will introduce at least one or two of his models, and we will see why the contribution he made is still so much valid. After Ricardo, we had John Stuart Mill, Karl Marx, all with great introductions and elaborations within economics. So with them, the concept of economics enters into a scientific age. And at the end of 18th century, beginning of 19th century, we have Henry Thornton, who brings the concept of money, credit, exchange, and business cycles, the theories which have been developed later. So economics has learned a great deal from these founders of its foundations.